The sun hung low and heavy over the Florida Gulf, the kind of late summer evening where the air itself seems to hum. Heat shimmered off the asphalt, and in the small coastal town of Clearwater, the ocean glowed like a sheet of molten glass. The date was August 12, 1995, the last day anyone saw Michael and Erin Walsh. The first reports were simple, almost forgettable. A young couple failed to return home after dinner. But what began as a routine missing persons case soon settled into the kind of silence that feels wrong. They had celebrated their wedding anniversary that night at a roadside diner with a smell of coffee mixed with the salt breeze. The waitress remembered them because they'd shared a slice of key lime pie, laughing quietly over it, and because Erin had asked, almost offhandedly, whether there were any motels nearby. "Just in case we get too tired to drive back," she'd said. By 9:17 p.m., the diner's neon sign flickered across their windshield as they pulled onto Highway 19. That grainy piece of surveillance footage, their car easing out of the lot, taillights glowing red, would become the last confirmed trace of them. Hours later, when they didn't arrive home, Erin's sister tried calling their house phone. It rang and rang, unanswered. 2 days later, their silver Ford Taurus was found parked neatly along the shoreline near Sand Key. The doors were unlocked, the keys still in the ignition. Inside, Erin's purse, Michael's jacket, a half-empty bottle of water, a cassette of Fleetwood Mac. No signs of a struggle, no note, no footprints leading toward the water. Just the sound of wind through the dunes and the endless rhythm of waves. The police report would later describe the scene as undisturbed. But to anyone who's lived by the sea, that word means little. Florida's coast erased evidence the way the tide swallows footprints. Every clue dissolves. Every secret sinks. Neighbors recalled hearing nothing unusual that night. A few claimed they saw headlights moving toward the pier after midnight, but no one could say for sure whose they were. One man, a fisherman, told officers he thought he heard a woman's voice near the dunes, not shouting, not afraid, just calling a name into the dark. He couldn't remember what it was. By the following week, the story made local headlines. Clearwater couple vanishes near coastline. A simple headline for a mystery that would refuse to fade. Reporters captured footage of the abandoned car, police officers combing the sand, a detective shielding her eyes from the glare. But behind the official search, there lingered something quieter, an unease that spread to the town like humidity. People began to talk. Some said they'd argued that night. Others whispered that Erin had been distant for weeks, that Michael had withdrawn from his friends. Theories grew like weeds in the cracks of fact. But none of them could explain the one thing everyone kept circling back to. The car doors unlocked, the keys waiting, as if they had simply stepped out for a moment and never stepped back in. The diner closed a few years later, the neon sign finally going dark. The waitress who'd served them moved inland, but she kept a copy of the old receipt, a small, faded slip of paper that still smelled faintly of sugar and coffee. Sometimes she said she'd look at the date printed on it, August 12, 1995, and feel a shiver, though she couldn't say why. The tide has long since claimed that stretch of beach, reshaping the dunes and swallowing the spot where their car once sat. But even now, on certain nights, locals say you can hear something on the wind. Not voices, not exactly, just a kind of echo that doesn't belong to the sea. And it's here, in this quiet space between memory and myth, that the story begins. Because the ocean wasn't the only thing keeping secrets that night. Before they became a headline, before the whispers and the grainy photographs on missing posters, Michael and Erin Walsh were the kind of couple people pointed to as proof that real love still existed. Clearwater in the early 90s was a postcard town. Pastel houses, fishermen smoking on the docks, orange sunsets spilling across the bay. And within that small, salt-worn world, Michael and Erin seemed perfectly at home. Michael was 29 tall, quietly magnetic, the sort of man who looked like he'd been built by the ocean itself. Sun-marked skin, strong hands, eyes the color of sea glass. He worked restoring old wooden boats, breathing life back into vessels long forgotten. Locals said he had a craftsman's patience, a poet's silence. He often stayed late in his workshop, sanding planks under the dim glow of a single hanging bulb, music humming faintly from an old radio. Erin was a teacher at Clearwater High, a gentle spirit who painted on weekends and carried a camcorder everywhere. Her students adored her, She was the kind of teacher who remembered birthdays, who encouraged kids to see beauty in ordinary things. She filmed everything. The rain sliding down classroom windows, seagulls crowding a pier, Michael repairing a sailboat with his sleeves rolled up. She said the camera helped her remember how moments felt, not just how they looked. Together, they were harmony. Weekends found them at the farmer's market or out on Michael's small boat, drifting past the mangroves. Erin filmed those days endlessly, her laughter over the wind, Michael pretending to hide from the lens. In one clip that would later resurface on local news, she asks him what he loves most about the ocean. He glances up, squints at the horizon, and says, "It doesn't keep anything forever." She laughs, not realizing the weight of his answer. Their friends described the Walshes as inseparable. They hosted dinner parties that felt like warm lantern light. Wine bottles on the porch rail, music low, the sound of waves in the background. Erin would lean her head on Michael's shoulder while talking to guests, and he would look at her the way a man does when he's already said everything worth saying. But even the calmest waters have undertows. Erin's sister, Marianne, remembers small changes a year before they vanished. Michael became withdrawn, skipping family gatherings, locking his workshop door when he used to leave it open. Erin, meanwhile, started keeping a journal, private, meticulous, full of dream fragments. She wrote about waking up at 3 a.m. to find the bed empty, about hearing someone outside the house, about shadows where there shouldn't be any. Neighbors noticed odd things, too. The sound of Michael's truck starting late at night, headlights sweeping across the yard, and once, a faint argument muffled through the open window. But these were small-town observations, half-formed, softened by politeness. People tell themselves not to read too much into things. Still, when Erin's camcorder tapes were later reviewed by police, some footage stood out. One showed her filming a quiet breakfast, orange juice, sunlight, the clink of spoons. Michael looks at the camera and smiles, but it's tight, uneasy. He says, "You don't have to film everything, you know." Erin laughs nervously. The camera lowers. The picture tilts, and for a moment his expression shifts. Not angry, just vacant, as though he's somewhere else entirely. For all their perfection, there was a silence living between them. Erin's colleagues remember her skipping lunch breaks to grade papers in the darkened classroom, her eyes tired, her wedding ring absent some days. She still spoke fondly of Michael, but her stories began to sound rehearsed, as if she were reminding herself how to love him. In the months before their disappearance, Michael sold one of his boats, his favorite, a small white sloop named Erin's Wing. When a friend asked why, he shrugged and said, "We won't be needing it much longer." The friend assumed he meant they were planning to move, maybe start fresh somewhere else. But no plans were ever found. Their last home video together was dated July 30th, 1995. They're on the beach at sunset, Erin's hair whipping in the wind, the camera shaking slightly as she films Michael skipping stones. He turns to her, waves, and says something lost to the wind. She zooms in on his face, and for a fleeting second he looks past the lens directly into her, or perhaps through her, and the image cuts abruptly to black. People remember the Walshes now through fragments. The way Erin's laughter could fill a room. The way Michael's hands were never still. Their friends say if you looked at them from the outside, they seemed untouched by the world's hardness. But what no one saw, or maybe what no one wanted to see, was how fragile that perfection had become. By the summer of '95, something invisible had already begun to unravel. Erin's diary stopped mid-sentence in early August. Michael's workshop ledger had a single unfinished entry, the word repairs trailing off into nothing. When they vanished days later, the town mourned the couple they thought they knew, the love story everyone envied. But as time passed, their image began to change. The laughter in those tapes sounded different. The smiles, when replayed, looked practiced. Memory is fickle that way. It edits the past to fit the ending. And maybe that's what haunts people most about Michael and Erin Walsh. How ordinary they seemed. How easily a love story could fade into a mystery. How no one noticed the silence growing between two people until it swallowed them both. The night of August 12, 1995 began like any other humid Florida evening. Thick air, restless sky, the faint hum of crickets outside the diner windows. Baker's Diner sat just off Highway 19, its red neon sign flickering over a near-empty parking lot. Inside, the hum of the refrigerator and the slow spin of ceiling fans filled the quiet between conversations. The kind of place where time moves slower, where everyone seemed to be waiting for something they couldn't name. Around 8:30 p.m., Michael and Aaron Walsh walked in, hand in hand, like any couple out for a late dinner. The waitress, Linda Brewer, remembered them immediately. She said Aaron smiled first, soft, polite, and Michael nodded with that absent, tired kind of warmth people have after a long day. They ordered simple food, 2 burgers, 1 black coffee, 1 iced tea, and a slice of key lime pie to share. Linda remembered that detail vividly because Aaron had asked if the pie was homemade, then laughed when Linda admitted it came from a frozen box. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Aaron asked for extra napkins. Michael kept glancing out the window. Linda thought maybe they'd argue before coming in. Something subtle, the kind of tension you can feel, but not quite define. She noticed that Aaron touched a camera bag beside her 3 times during the meal, like she was making sure it was still there. When Linda brought the check, Aaron asked quietly if there was a motel nearby that wasn't too expensive. It was a strange question, she said later, because they only lived 30 minutes away. The security footage from Baker's Diner is grainy, a low frame-rate black and white feed that looks more like a memory than a video. At 9:17 p.m., you can see Michael and Aaron exiting the building. The door swings shut behind them, their silhouettes slipping beneath the buzzing sign. Michael leads. Aaron follows a step behind, her head turned slightly toward something across the road. The camera catches a faint reflection on a nearby car window, something like movement, but it's too blurred to identify. Then they're gone, swallowed by the darkness beyond the lot. That short clip would become the foundation of everything that followed. Detectives replayed it hundreds of times, looking for clues in gestures, posture, anything that might suggest what happened next. But it always ended the same way. 2 figures stepping into the unknown. By 10 p.m., the sky had turned heavy with clouds. Locals later reported lightning out over the Gulf, brief flashes illuminating the coastline. A gas station clerk a few miles south recalled seeing a silver Taurus pull into the lot around 10:15 p.m. He remembered because the driver didn't buy anything, just parked under the lights for a minute before driving off. He couldn't recall their faces, only that the woman in the passenger seat seemed to be crying. After midnight, a fisherman at Sand Key Bridge claimed to see headlights approach the coastal road, stop near the dunes, and turn off. He said he thought it was a couple parking to watch the storm roll in, something common on summer nights. He didn't see anyone get out. 15 minutes later, rain began to fall, light at first, then in sheets. By morning, the tide had risen higher than usual. When Aaron and Michael didn't show up at work the next day, no one panicked immediately. Weekends were flexible. They often took impromptu trips. It wasn't until Sunday night, when Aaron's sister couldn't reach her by phone, that the first worry set in. By Monday morning, the Walsh's neighbors noticed newspapers piling up on their porch, the mailbox still full. Detectives were dispatched to the couple's small house near Gulfview Drive. The door was locked, no signs of forced entry. Inside, everything looked painfully ordinary. Aaron's shoes by the door, 2 coffee cups in the sink, a half-finished crossword puzzle on the table. The bed had been slept in recently, sheets slightly rumpled, but nothing else seemed disturbed. Only one thing was missing, Aaron's camcorder. Later that afternoon, a deputy found their car parked along a narrow road near the beach, half hidden by palmettos. The doors were unlocked, keys in the ignition. Inside were their belongings, untouched. Michael's watch rested in the cup holder, still ticking. The car battery was nearly dead, suggesting it had been there for some time. Investigators combed the surrounding dunes and shallow water. No footprints, no tire tracks beyond the car's own. The tide had already erased most of what might have been there. They searched the nearby jetty, the mangroves, the rocky edge of the bay where fishermen sometimes gathered. Nothing. The police issued a missing persons bulletin that night. Local news aired the couple's photographs. Michael smiling under a boat canopy, Aaron holding her camera by the pier. Neighbors volunteered to help, walking the beach with flashlights. Helicopters scanned the coastline, their beams sweeping across dark water. For 3 days, nothing surfaced. Then came the small, unsettling details. At a gas station 20 miles north, a clerk reported someone matching Michael's description filling a gas can the next morning alone. A motel owner near Ocala claimed a woman who looked like Erin checked in briefly on August 14th, but left without staying the night. Both accounts were dismissed as mistaken identity. But even now, they linger in the official file, fragments of uncertainty. By the end of the week, the case had gone from confusion to quiet dread. Detectives found no sign of foul play, yet nothing about the disappearance felt voluntary. If they had run away, why leave everything behind? Why leave the car in perfect order, like an exhibit set for discovery? Reporters began to gather outside the Walsh residence. News anchors stood against a backdrop of palm trees and police tape, their voices calm, rehearsed. A Clearwater couple vanishes without a trace. Investigators are calling it one of the most puzzling disappearances in recent Florida history. Inside the house, family members sat surrounded by photographs, waiting for the phone to ring. Erin's sister described the feeling as a soundless panic, the sense that time had frozen, that every minute stretched too long. Michael's father called it something else entirely. He said it felt like the ocean had swallowed their names. The official report would later note, no signs of struggle, no financial withdrawal, no known enemies, no destination recorded. The kind of case that law enforcement hates, because it offers nothing to solve, just silence. As the sun set on the 5th day, Detective Helen Madsen stood near the shoreline where the tourists had been found. The wind lifted sand around her boots. She looked out toward the horizon, the waves black in the fading light. Somewhere out there, she thought, 2 people had vanished so completely that even the sea had nothing to return. And as night fell again, the lights along the beach flickered on one by one, illuminating an emptiness that no one could quite name. In that silence, a single truth began to take root, the kind that chills you not because of what you know, but because of everything you don't. Somewhere between 2 highway exits, between a diner and the ocean, Michael and Erin Walsh had simply ceased to exist. The search began at sunrise, 3 days after Michael and Erin vanished. The August heat was already pressing down by the time the first volunteers arrived at the shoreline. Off-duty deputies, neighbors, fishermen, a few of Erin's students who refused to believe their teacher could simply be gone. The beach looked endless that morning, the horizon a blur between pale sky and gray-green water. Deputies drove slow along the coast, tires leaving deep tracks that the tide erased within hours. Every footprint felt temporary, every clue fragile. Helicopters circled overhead, their blades scattering sand. Search dogs padded across the dunes, noses low, handlers calling commands into radios that crackled and hissed. Reporters arrived soon after, setting up cameras by the barricades, their voices slicing to the hush. Authorities continue to search for Michael and Erin Walsh, missing since last weekend. At first, hope moved like a current through the crowd. People believed the couple might still be alive, lost, injured, maybe hiding. The idea of tragedy felt too heavy, too unreal under the bright Florida sun. Erin's sister, Mary Ann, walked the sand in sneakers soaked through with salt water, clutching her phone as if it might ring at any moment. Michael's father stayed near the parked patrol cars, silent, eyes fixed on the sea. By noon, search teams had combed the coastline in both directions. They found cigarette butts, an old shoe, pieces of driftwood, but nothing that tied to Michael or Erin. The car had been dusted for prints. Only the couples were present. Forensics swept for fibers, blood, any sign of struggle. There was none. Even the interior smelled untouched, like sun-baked leather and salt. Detectives expanded the search inland, sending teams to nearby motels, gas stations, and marinas. Flyers went up in shop windows. Missing Michael and Erin Walsh, last seen August 12th, Clearwater area. Erin's photograph, a still from one of her home videos, showed her smiling at the camera, light catching in her hair. Beneath it, a phone number in bold black type. In town, the story spread faster than the investigation could keep up. Some said they'd seen the couple arguing near the pier earlier that week. Others swore they recognized Michael at a hardware store after the supposed disappearance. Each rumor was logged, checked, dismissed. The uncertainty gnawed at everyone. A story with too many beginnings and no middle. Detective Helen Madsen, who had taken lead on the case, told a local reporter that missing person searches often run on borrowed time. The first 48 hours are everything, she said. After that, you're chasing ghosts. Her team refused to give up, though. They dove into shallow inlets around Sand Key, dragging nets through the murky water. They scoured the nearby mangrove trails where snakes curled in the roots, hoping for any trace. A piece of clothing, a footprint, anything human. But Florida hides things too easily. The water, the weather, the sheer expanse of land, all of it conspires against the truth. By the end of the first week, the tone of the search had changed. The energy that began with urgency softened into exhaustion. Volunteers stopped bringing coolers and cameras. Reporters began to pack up, leaving only one local crew who lingered, desperate for a follow-up story. Inside the Walsh home, detectives cataloged belongings with mechanical precision. A half-read novel on the bedside table, a grocery list on the counter, Aaron's art supplies stacked neatly by the window. Everything too normal, too still. A neighbor who came to drop off flowers said it felt like walking into a pause life. Theories began to bloom where facts couldn't. Some believed they drowned, a sudden current, an accident. Others whispered darker things. That Michael had debts, that Aaron was trying to leave him, that one of them snapped. But there was no proof, no sign of violence, no confession to chase. Theories like the tide came and went. One search volunteer, a retired Coast Guard officer named Tom Reardon, later said something that captured the mood of those days. You start off looking for people, he said, and after a while, you're just looking for answers. The difference is answers don't float. By the second week, the official search scaled down. Police tape came down from the beach road. The volunteers stopped showing up. Only Helen remained out there some evenings, watching the sunset from the bluff where the car was found. You look at the water long enough, she told a colleague, and it starts to look back. In the weeks that followed, time itself seemed to stall in Clearwater. The Walsh's absence became part of the town's rhythm, an unspoken story everyone carried in fragments. The waitress from Baker's Diner quit her job and moved north. Aaron's students left flowers at her empty classroom desk. Michael's workshop stayed closed, tools still hanging in perfect order, sawdust undisturbed on the floor. 6 months later, when the case officially went cold, the news segment announcing the suspension of active search efforts lasted less than 2 minutes. No new leads have surfaced in the disappearance of Michael and Aaron Walsh, the anchor read, her tone flat, professional. On the screen, their faces appeared side by side, smiling, frozen, trapped in the endless repetition of unsolved tragedy. But even after the cameras left, small reminders lingered. A single flyer stayed pinned to community board at the marina, its corners curled and yellowed. A mailbox at their old address filled with letters from people they'd never met, strangers who wrote to say they still dreamed of them. And every year, when anniversary came, the town seemed to pause, just for a moment, as if expecting news that never arrived. The ocean rolled on, indifferent. The dunes shifted. Time covered the story in layers of sand and silence. For the families, the search never truly ended. They kept their phones charged, kept spare copies of the missing posters in their cars. They learned to live with the ache of unfinished sentences. And for Detective Helen Madsen, standing on that same stretch of shoreline months later, the case had begun to feel like a voice caught in static, always there, just out of reach. She knew what people said about unsolved disappearances. That time heals, that closure comes eventually. But she didn't believe it, because sometimes time doesn't heal. It just buries, and what's buried doesn't always stay gone. Detective Helen Madsen wasn't supposed to stay on the case. In her 30-year career with the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, she'd seen everything disappear, people, evidence, even her own certainty. But there was something about the Walshes that refused to let go of her. Maybe it was the ordinariness of it, or maybe it was Aaron's smile on the missing poster. Open, trusting, full of life that didn't seem finished. Whatever it was, Helen found herself returning to that coastline long after the official search had ended. By the fall of 1995, the file had already started to yellow around the edges. The reports were neatly typed, labeled, and numbered, but inside them was chaos. No witnesses, no conclusive sightings, no body. The Walsh disappearance became just another folder in a row of unresolved tragedies. But Helen couldn't close it. She told herself it was professionalism, unfinished work. The truth was simpler. She was haunted. She drove out to Sand Key every few weeks, standing by the same patch of road where their car had been found. The scene never looked the same twice, sometimes calm and glassy, sometimes black and roaring. She began to think of it as a living thing, something that kept secrets rather than lost them. Locals would see her car parked by the dunes and know exactly why she was there. Someone even started leaving flowers on the hood. Lilies, mostly, though Helen never discovered who. Years passed like that, small rituals replacing answers. Every anniversary, she walked the beach with a flashlight and a notebook. She'd kneel, sift through shells and seaweed, as if truth could still wash ashore after all that time. Unfinished business with the sea, she called it. Some officers laughed. Others just stopped asking. In early 1998, a clerk at a used car lot found a repair invoice tucked inside an old glove compartment. The name on it, Michael Walsh. The date, 3 days after his disappearance. Helen was called in to verify it. The paper was stained and sun-faded, but the signature looked real. The clerk swore the car had been sitting in a repossession yard since 1996. It didn't match the Walsh's Taurus, but the handwriting was eerily similar. Helen sent it to forensics. The analysis came back inconclusive. Similar pen pressure, partial match, not enough to confirm identity. Still, it was something, a pulse where there shouldn't be one. She spent weeks tracking the origin of that invoice. It led nowhere. A defunct repair shop, records destroyed in a fire, another dead end. But it stirred something in her, the way a ghost might stir curtains in a still room. In 1999, she requested the Walsh case be reopened under unresolved circumstances. Her superiors hesitated. Budgets were tight, the leads too old. "You're chasing smoke," her captain told her. Helen just nodded, but she filed the paperwork anyway. She started to notice patterns others had missed. Michael's workshop, for instance, had phone records showing 2 outgoing calls made after the couple disappeared. Both were local, both to a number traced in an old marine supply shop in Tarpon Springs, owned by a man named Eli Tanner. He had worked with Michael briefly on a restoration project in the early 90s before vanishing himself in 1996, reportedly while sailing south for business. His disappearance was filed, investigated, and ultimately dismissed as voluntary. Helen drove out to the old shop one afternoon, long after it had closed. The building was half collapsed, the smell of oil and mildew clinging to the air. She found nothing but a few rusted tools and a faded photograph of 2 men beside a boat. One of them was Michael. The other, she assumed, was Tanner, smiling too wide for the camera. She pinned the photo above her desk, next to Aaron's missing flyer. 2 faces, both gone, both framed by the same stretch of Florida coast. Over time, the case became more than a file. It became a shadow that followed Helen home. She'd dream of Aaron's camcorder, the missing one, and wake with the sound of waves still in her ears. She'd catch herself replaying the diner footage late at night, pausing at the moment Aaron turns her head. "What did you see?" she'd whisper to the grainy screen. But it never answered. By 2002, most of her colleagues had retired or transferred. The Walsh case was unofficially considered unsolvable. But Helen couldn't stop. She began visiting Aaron's sister, Marianne, once a year, always around August. They'd drink coffee on the back porch, trading fragments of what they'd learned. Marianne confessed that sometimes she still dialed Aaron's old number just to hear the disconnected tone. "It's strange," she told Helen, "how silence can start to sound like a voice." In her own life, Helen had little left to anchor her. Her husband had passed away years earlier. Her grown son lived across the country. Work had become her way of staying tethered to something real. The Walsh case wasn't just unfinished business anymore. It was proof that some things resist explanation, that truth can vanish just as completely as people do. In 2004, she returned once more to the coast. She sat in her car overlooking the water, the case file open on the passenger seat. The pages were worn from handling, corners bent from years of reading and rereading. She thought about the countless stories buried under Florida's calm surface, the missing, the lost, the forgotten. The state had a way of swallowing its secrets whole. That evening, as the sun bled orange across the horizon, Helen picked up a recorder and dictated an update. Case 95 to 417. No new physical evidence. Emotional engagement remains high. Unresolved timeline discrepancies persist. Recommendation: continue personal inquiry. She smiled faintly at that last line. It wasn't protocol to admit emotion in a report, but honesty seemed all that was left. Before driving home, she walked down to sand. The tide was low, the wind faint. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, polished piece of driftwood she'd kept from the original search, a fragment from one of Michael's old boats, found near where the car was discovered. She turned it over in her hand, then set it gently in the water, letting the waves take it. Sometimes, she thought, people vanish because they choose to, sometimes because something takes them, and sometimes because the world itself forgets to hold on to them. But she wasn't ready to forget. Not yet. Helen looked out over the blackening sea and whispered, "I'm still here." It wasn't a promise. It was defiance. Behind her, the water shimmered under the fading sun, and for a fleeting second, she thought she saw something. A flicker of movement far down the beach, two distant figures walking hand in hand toward the tide. She blinked, and they were gone. The detective who stayed turned back to her car, the file beside her glowing faintly under the dashboard light. And she knew this wasn't over. Not for her. Not for them. Not for the sea. In the summer of 2001, 6 years after Michael and Aaron Walsh disappeared, a phone call reached Detective Helen Madsen's desk that would stir everything she had tried to lay to rest. It came from a man named Cliff Rowe, who lived 2 houses down from the Walshes back in 1995. His voice on the line was tremulous, worn by years of guilt. "I think I saw something," he said. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." Helen met him at his small, peeling house near Gulfview Drive. The air smelled of salt and cut grass, and the cicadas were screaming. Cliff was older than she remembered, thinner, eyes clouded with regret. He invited her inside, where the television was on mute and a stack of old newspapers sat by the couch. He told her that the week before the couple disappeared, he'd been out late fixing his boat trailer when he heard raised voices from the Walsh's yard. It wasn't a violent fight, he said, but the words had a desperate edge. He'd recognized Aaron's voice first, trembling but sharp. "You can't keep doing this," she'd said. Then quieter, "I know about the boat. I know everything." He couldn't hear Michael's reply, only the sound of the screen door slamming and the crunch of gravel as a car pulled away. Cliff had assumed it was a lover's quarrel, the kind of thing you don't interfere with in a small town. But now, 6 years later, after a stroke and too many sleepless nights, he couldn't stop thinking about that moment. "I don't know if it means anything," he told Helen, but she sounded scared. Helen thanked him, wrote down every detail, and as she walked back to her car, she felt a familiar pulled case, the undertow of something unfinished. That night, she reopened the old file once again, reading through her own notes with fresh eyes. There, in one of the early interviews, a waitress had mentioned Aaron asking about nearby motels. And now this, a fight, a secret about a boat. The next morning, Helen tracked down Lisa Gentry, another neighbor who had lived behind the Walsh property in 1995. Lisa remembered something, too, though she'd never been sure if it mattered. "It was maybe 2 days before they went missing," she said. "I saw a blue sedan parked by their fence. Not Michael's car, something older, boxy. Aaron was standing by it, talking to someone inside. They were arguing. Lisa couldn't see the driver clearly, only a man's silhouette. But she remembered Aaron's posture, rigid, frightened, her hands moving as she spoke. Then the car pulled away fast, kicking up dust. "I didn't tell anyone back then because I figured it was personal," Lisa said. "Now, I don't know." She didn't look safe. Helen asked her to describe the sedan. Blue, maybe navy, Lisa said. The kind of color that disappears when the light hits it. Back at the station, Helen searched through archived vehicle reports. There was again a blue 1987 Oldsmobile Cutlass, registered to a name she hadn't seen in years. Eli Tanner, Michael's old employer. The same man who had vanished a year later under equally strange circumstances. She drove to the old boatyard where Tanner's business once stood, now overrun by weeds and silence. Birds scattered from the roof as she stepped out her car. She walked to the remains, broken hulls, warped planks, the smell of oil thick in the air. It was there she noticed a shallow pit near the back fence, half filled with ash and old with fragments. She crouched down, brushed away the dirt, and found bits of melted metal and glass, pieces of something burned long ago. When she sent the debris for analysis, the lab confirmed traces of synthetic material, possibly from a VHS cassette shell. The irony wasn't lost on her. Erin, the woman who documented everything, whose camera had vanished, whose voice might have been erased by fire. That discovery reopened the investigation quietly, unofficially. Helen began revisiting every old witness, every forgotten clue. Some were cooperative. Others were weary of revisiting the past. But with each conversation, the image of the Walshes began to shift. One of Michael's co-workers described him as focused, maybe too focused. He'd been under pressure, trying to finish a restoration job on an old fishing vessel that belonged to Tanner. There were rumors of illegal salvage operations, boats stripped for parts, cash exchanged off the books. Michael had reportedly confronted Tanner about unpaid wages weeks before he disappeared. He told me he wasn't going to let it go, the co-worker said. Said he had proof. If that proof existed, it was gone now, unless Erin had filmed it. Helen started visiting the Walsh home again, now owned by strangers. She stood across the street, imagining the life that once pulsed there. Erin hanging laundry on the line, Michael tightening a bolt on the porch railing, the faint sound of a camcorder running. Ordinary days that, in hindsight, looked like the prelude to something dark. Late one night, sitting at her kitchen table surrounded by photographs and files, Helen noticed something she'd never connected before. A receipt in Michael's handwriting for a metal barrel and lighter fluid, dated the day before the disappearance. It had been logged and ignored in the original search, assumed unrelated. But combined with the neighbor's recollection of him burning something behind the workshop, it formed a pattern that felt suddenly, terribly deliberate. She pictured him under the low amber light of his shop, feeding something, maybe papers, maybe tapes, into the barrel. Erin's voice in her memory. I know about the boat. I know everything. That line wouldn't leave her. The next morning, Helen visited the property where the workshop had stood. The new owners gave her permission to look around. Most of the structure was gone, replaced by a storage shed. But behind it, buried under a thin layer of dirt, she found a faint outline of scorched ground, circular, about the size of a small burned pit. She stood there a long time, listening to the wind move through the palms, trying to imagine the fire that once burned there. That night, she called Marianne Walsh. The two women hadn't spoken in months. Helen explained what she'd found, carefully avoiding speculation. Marianne listened quietly, her voice barely above a whisper when she finally said, Erin used to tell me the camera was her safety. She said, if anything ever happens, it's all on tape. Helen's pulse quickened. She asked if Erin had ever mentioned where she kept her recordings. Marianne hesitated, then said something Helen would think about for years. She told me once she had one somewhere Michael would never look, because he didn't believe in secrets. I didn't understand what she meant. For the first time in years, Helen felt something shift, not resolution, but momentum. The case was no longer about where they went, but why. She wrote a note in her journal that night. People vanish in layers. The surface goes first, then the story, then the truth. And as she closed the file for the evening, she felt the faint hum of something returning. Not hope, exactly, but its cousin. That quiet, electric awareness that a ghost had just whispered back. The Walsh's story was no longer about two people who vanished. It was becoming the story of what they left behind. The rain had started before dawn. Soft at first, a whisper on the window, then heavier, until the Florida morning blurred into silver streaks. Detective Helen Madsen sat in her car outside the Walsh home, windshield wipers struggling to keep up. It had been almost a decade since the couple vanished, and still, something in that small house drew her back like a current. Inside, the new owners, an older couple named Richard and Lorna Hayes, had agreed to let her take a final look. They bought the property in 1998 and were now preparing to sell. "We're cleaning out the attic," Lorna had told her over the phone. "There's something up there you might want to see." We almost threw it out. Helen followed Lorna up the narrow staircase, her flashlight cutting through the dust and dimness. The air smelled like cedar and old paper. Boxes were stacked in uneven rows, most labeled miscellaneous or storage. But in the far corner, beneath a layer of insulation and time, lay an old canvas duffel bag, its zipper rusted shut. Lorna said they'd found it wedged between rafters, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. Helen knelt beside it, brushing off years of dust. The zipper resisted but finally gave way with a groan. Inside were fragments of a life frozen mid-breath, a broken watch, a few photographs curled from humidity, a half-filled notebook, and at the bottom, a black VHS tape, unmarked except for the faintest scrawl in silver pen. August 10th, 1995. Her heartbeat slowed. For a moment she didn't move. The air around her seemed to tighten, as though the house itself were holding its breath. She took the tape out carefully, her gloved hands trembling. "Do you know what's on this?" she asked. Lorna shook her head. "No idea. We don't even have a player anymore." Helen thanked her, slipped the tape into an evidence bag, and drove straight to the precinct. The old video room smelled faintly of static and dust. She plugged in the only working VCR left in the building, connected it to a small monitor, and pressed play. At first, nothing, just flickering snow, the faint hum of tape. Then an image stuttered to life. Erin, behind the camera, laughing as she filmed Michael fixing a boat in the yard. The date stamp confirmed it. 2 days before the disappearance. The footage was intimate, almost painfully ordinary. Erin teased him about his messy hair. He muttered something about her always recording, and for a while it felt like watching ghosts in their most human form. Then, midway through the tape, something shifted. The camera was placed on a surface, aimed toward the open garage. The mood turned quieter, more deliberate. Erin's voice spoke off-screen. "He's been acting strange lately. He won't tell me what's going on. But I know it's about the boat. I think he's hiding something from me." A pause. You could hear the rustle of her breath, the hesitation. "If anything happens, this is proof." The sound of footsteps echoed behind her. Michael's voice sudden, sharp. "Erin, are you filming again?" The screen jolted as she turned, the picture shaking. The argument that followed was low, half cut off by static. You couldn't make out every word, but the tone said everything. Frustration, fear, love curdled into something tense and fragile. Then the tape cut to black. Helen sat motionless, the whir of the VCR the only sound. She rewound it, played it again, slower this time. At the very end, just before the screen went dark, she caught something, a reflection in the glass door behind Michael. Another figure, standing outside, just barely visible. Not a trick of light. Someone was there, watching. She paused the frame, adjusted the focus. The face was blurred, but the shape of the shoulders, the posture, it wasn't Michael, and it wasn't Erin. Her mind flashed back to the blue sedan, the burned VHS fragments, the name Eli Tanner. Could it be him, or someone connected to him? She printed a still frame from the tape, enhancing the image as much as the old machine allowed. Then she noticed something else, a small logo on Michael's work shirt, Tanner Marine Restorations. It confirmed their link. But beneath that, faintly scrawled in pen, with the initials R.S. Helen didn't recognize them, but she knew they mattered. She spent the following week digging into Tanner's old employment records. Buried deep in a 1993 ledger, she found a list of subcontractors. One name stood out, Rory Stokes, a mechanic who'd worked for Tanner during a salvage project that ended abruptly after an insurance investigation. Stokes had been charged once for fraud, never convicted, and disappeared from public record in 1996. His last known address, a trailer park near Dunedin, barely 15 minutes from where the Walsh's car had been found. When Helen arrived there, the property was long abandoned. The trailers rusted, grass